December 24th, Christmas Eve, a night when millions of families across America gather around decorated trees, exchange gifts, and celebrate everything we associate with safety, love, and tradition. But what if I told you that for some killers, this exact moment, when the world is at its most vulnerable, most trusting, becomes the perfect hunting ground? What makes a human being choose the one day symbolizing peace on Earth to unleash absolute carnage? Picture this: Covina, California, December 24th, 2008, a suburban home glowing with Christmas lights. Inside, the warm smell of roasted turkey fills the air. Children's laughter echoes through rooms decorated with garlands and mistletoe. A family Christmas party in full swing. Parents, grandparents, kids tearing through wrapping paper with pure joy. The kind of scene you'd see on a Hallmark card. Pure, innocent, safe. Then the doorbell rings. Someone walks to answer it, probably expecting a late guest or a neighbor dropping by with holiday cookies. The door swings open, and standing there framed by the glow of Christmas lights is Santa Claus himself. Red suit, white beard, the whole costume. But something's wrong, terribly wrong, because beneath that jolly disguise, Bruce Pardo is gripping a 9mm handgun in each hand. Strapped to his back, hidden under the Santa suit, is a homemade flamethrower, a pressurized device designed to spray racing fuel and ignite everything it touches. This isn't Santa bringing presents. This is death dressed in red velvet. What happens next unfolds in less than 3 minutes. Gunshots shatter the Christmas music. Screams replace laughter. Pardo methodically executes 9 people, his ex-wife's family, turning their holiday celebration into a massacre. Then he douses the house in accelerant and sets it ablaze, incinerating the crime scene and several bodies beyond recognition. By the time first responders arrive, the home is an inferno. And Bruce Pardo, he's already vanished into the Christmas night, leaving behind only flames, corpses, and a question that haunts us to this day. Why Christmas? This wasn't random. This wasn't a spontaneous explosion of rage. This was calculated, planned, theatrical, and the date wasn't coincidental. Because for certain minds, twisted, narcissistic, vengeful minds, Christmas isn't about joy, it's about pain, it's about loss, and most importantly, it's about making damn sure the world witnesses their suffering by destroying the very symbol of happiness itself. So let's talk about what was really happening inside Bruce Pardo's head, and why Christmas becomes a killing season for those who think like him. Why Christmas becomes a killing season for those who think like him. But before we go deeper into the twisted psychology behind these Christmas killers, I need to know something. Are you starting to see the pattern? Does this disturb you as much as it fascinates you? Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever heard of a Christmas crime that still haunts you? And if you're realizing right now that understanding how killers think isn't morbid, it's survival knowledge, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Because here's the deal. We don't glorify murderers, we dissect them. We pull apart their minds piece by piece so you can recognize the warning signs, understand the manipulation tactics, and protect yourself and the people you love. Every video on this channel is designed to make you sharper, more aware, harder to fool. So if that's the kind of content you want more of, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started. Now back to Bruce Pardo and the question everyone's afraid to ask. What was actually happening in his brain in the weeks, days, and hours leading up to that massacre? Because here's what most people get wrong about killers like him. They think it's about madness, about losing control. But the truth is far more terrifying. Bruce Pardo didn't lose control, he took control. And to understand how, we need to talk about something psychologists call the holiday blues. Except for certain personalities, it's not sadness at all, it's rage. It's humiliation weaponized, and it's been building for months. It's been building for months. Let's start with something most people don't want to admit. Christmas isn't magical for everyone. In fact, for some people, it's psychological torture. While the majority of us associate December with warmth, family gatherings, gift exchanges, and that sense of belonging we all crave, there's a darker side to the holiday season that nobody talks about. Psychologists have a term for it: holiday blues. It's that wave of depression and loneliness that hits certain individuals when the calendar flips to December. But here's where it gets dangerous. For some personality types, especially those with narcissistic traits or deep-seated resentment, it's not just sadness. It's not melancholy. It's pure, concentrated rage. Think about it this way. Imagine your life has completely fallen apart. Your marriage just ended in a bitter divorce. You lost custody of the kids you thought were yours. Your finances are destroyed. You're living in some cheap apartment, alone, watching your former life continue without you. And then December arrives. Suddenly, every commercial on TV is showing perfect families opening presents together. Your social media feed is flooded with photos of people smiling, hugging, celebrating. Neighbors are decorating their homes with lights and inflatable Santas. The whole world is performing this choreographed dance of happiness. And where are you? Invisible, forgotten, discarded like last year's wrapping paper. Now add one critical detail to this scenario. You're not wired like most people. You have narcissistic tendencies. You don't process rejection the way emotionally healthy individuals do. For a narcissist, being abandoned isn't just painful. It's an existential threat. It's a direct attack on their inflated sense of self-worth. And when that fragile ego shatters, something terrifying happens inside their mind. The sadness transforms into a need for revenge. The isolation becomes fuel for violence. And Christmas, with all its emphasis on family unity and joy, becomes the ultimate insult. It's like the universe is rubbing salt in an open wound, showing you exactly what you lost, what you'll never have again. Bruce Pardo's divorce had just been finalized. He lost the house he thought was his. He lost his relationship with his ex-wife's children, kids he'd helped raise, and his ex-wife's family. They were gathering for Christmas dinner without him, laughing, celebrating, moving on as if he never existed. That's the thing people don't understand about narcissistic injury. It's not about love or loss in the traditional sense. It's about ego annihilation. In Pardo's distorted perception, that Christmas party wasn't just a family gathering. It was a public declaration that he didn't matter anymore, that he could be erased, replaced, forgotten. So he didn't attack on a random Tuesday in March. He waited. He planned. He let the resentment simmer and calcify into something cold and methodical. Because in his mind, that Christmas celebration was the world celebrating his defeat, and Bruce Pardo wasn't going to let that happen. He was going to make absolutely certain that nobody would ever forget him again. And to understand exactly how he planned to do that, we need to look at the way revenge-driven killers construct their attacks. Step by calculated step, step by calculated step. Here's where most people completely misunderstand killers like Bruce Pardo. When these stories hit the news, the immediate reaction is always the same. He must have snapped. He lost his mind. It was a moment of insanity. But that's not how it works. That's actually the opposite of how it works. The truth is far more chilling. These Christmas killers aren't out of control. They're hyper-focused. They're not impulsive. They're methodical. Because for them, the act of killing isn't the end game. It's the message. It's the performance. It's about forcing the entire world to witness their pain and validate their existence, even if that validation comes through horror. Let me walk you through the psychological architecture of revenge-driven murder, because once you see the pattern, you'll recognize it everywhere. First, these individuals construct an internal narrative where they are the absolute victim. It doesn't matter what they actually did to contribute to their situation, the cheating, the abuse, the financial irresponsibility, whatever. In their rewritten version of reality, they were wronged, betrayed, humiliated without cause. This is classic narcissistic thinking. They take the messy, complicated truth of human relationships and distill it down to a simple story: innocent victim versus evil persecutors. And once that story solidifies in their mind, it becomes gospel. It becomes their justification for anything that comes next. Second, they choose their target with symbolic precision. Bruce Pardo didn't attack his ex-wife on some random afternoon at a grocery store parking lot. He waited for Christmas Eve. He waited for the moment when her entire family would be gathered together, celebrating, embodying everything he'd lost. Because Christmas isn't just a date on the calendar for these killers. It's a symbol of family, love, acceptance, belonging, all the things they feel were stolen from them. So destroying that symbol becomes the ultimate act of revenge. It's not enough to hurt the person who rejected them. They need to desecrate the very concept of happiness itself. Third comes the theatricality, and this is crucial. Bruce Pardo didn't just show up with a gun. He could have done that. It would have been effective. But instead, he spent time and money creating a Santa Claus costume. He built a homemade flamethrower. He choreographed his entrance. Why? Because he understood on some instinctual level that transforming the most beloved symbol of childhood innocence into an instrument of death would maximize the psychological impact. He wanted this crime to be unforgettable. He wanted it to contaminate every future Christmas for everyone who heard about it. He wanted his name carved into the collective consciousness, even if the only tool he had was terror. And, fourth, perhaps the darkest element of all, many of these killers know from the beginning that they're not coming back. Bruce Pardo purchased tickets to Canada. He had a getaway plan on paper, but hours after the massacre, he drove to his brother's house and shot himself in the head. The escape was never real. It was theater, just like the Santa suit, because the crime was never about survival or getting away with it. It was about making one final, definitive statement that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. And Christmas provided the perfect amplifier for that message. But Pardo wasn't alone in this twisted logic. There's a whole disturbing pattern of killers who've weaponized the holiday season in nearly identical ways. Bruce Pardo wasn't an anomaly. He wasn't some unique monster who appeared out of nowhere. He's part of a disturbing pattern that stretches back decades, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Take Ronald Gene Simmons, Arkansas, 1987. Over the course of the Christmas holiday, this man systematically murdered 16 members of his own family. 16. He killed his wife, his children, grandchildren, former in-laws. He methodically went from person to person, executing them one by one. And when it was over, when the bodies were piled up in his home, he calmly drove to a nearby town and turned himself into police. No remorse, no breakdown, just cold surrender. When investigators asked him why he did it, his answer was chillingly simple. They made me feel small. That's it. Not because they abused him, not because they threatened him. They made him feel insignificant. And for a narcissist, feeling small is worse than death itself. So he made sure they'd never make him feel that way again. Then there's James Edward Powell, Florida, 1990. In December, just as car dealerships were running their big holiday sales promotions and families were shopping for new vehicles to surprise their loved ones on Christmas morning, Powell walked into a General Motors Acceptance Corporation office with a .30 caliber rifle and opened fire. He killed 9 people, wounded 4 others. His motive? His car had been repossessed weeks earlier. He couldn't stand watching other people buy cars, especially during the season of gift-giving. The sight of families upgrading their vehicles, of salespeople smiling and shaking hands, of people experiencing the financial stability and joy he'd lost. It enraged him to the point of mass murder. The holiday season didn't inspire him, it humiliated him, and he responded with violence. Fast forward to 2012. Webster, New York, Christmas morning. William Spengler, a convicted felon who'd already served 17 years for killing his grandmother with a hammer, decided he had one more act left in him. He set his house on fire deliberately, knowing that firefighters would respond. And when those first responders arrived to save lives and protect the neighborhood, Spengler ambushed them from a nearby embankment with a rifle. He killed 2 firefighters, wounded 2 more plus a police officer. He left behind a typewritten note that read, "I still have to get ready to see how much of the neighborhood I can burn down, and do what I like doing best, killing people." There's no clearer statement of intent than that. He wasn't confused. He wasn't having a mental breakdown. He knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it on Christmas Day specifically. See the pattern forming? These aren't random explosions of madness. These are calculated acts of symbolic destruction. Every single one of these killers chose the holiday season because they understood, consciously or unconsciously, that the contrast between universal joy and personal emptiness would be unbearable. They knew that Christmas amplifies everything. Happiness for those who have it, despair for those who don't. And when that despair mixes with narcissistic rage, with a fundamental inability to process rejection or failure, it becomes lethal. These men didn't just want to kill people. They wanted to force society to acknowledge their suffering. They wanted to contaminate the most sacred day of the year with their pain. And they succeeded. But there's another layer to this phenomenon that most people never consider, something that's gotten exponentially worse in the age of social media and digital connectivity, because recognizing them might literally save lives. The warning. Signs are almost always there. The problem is we've been trained to ignore them, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to assume that someone talking about feeling wronged or making vague threats is just venting, just going through a rough patch. But there are specific behavioral patterns that separate normal grief and frustration from something far more dangerous, especially as the holiday season approaches. And understanding these distinctions isn't about being paranoid, it's about being prepared. First, watch for sudden and complete social withdrawal during December. We're talking about someone who was previously engaged, who had friends, who showed up to things, and then suddenly goes completely dark right when the holidays start. They stop answering calls, they cancel plans, they disappear from group chats. This isolation isn't accidental. It's often a sign that someone is mentally rehearsing something catastrophic. They're cutting ties because they're preparing for an end point. They're creating distance so that when the time comes, there are fewer people who might intervene or notice the escalation. Bruce Pardo stopped communicating with most of his social circle in the weeks leading up to Christmas Eve. The few people he did talk to noticed he seemed distant, preoccupied, but they assumed it was just divorce depression. They were wrong. Second, listen for an obsessive focus on personal injustices, especially if the person constantly frames themselves as the victim in every situation. Everyone complains sometimes, everyone has legitimate grievances, but there's a difference between processing pain and building a persecution narrative. When someone can't stop talking about how they were betrayed, abandoned, unfairly treated, and they refuse to acknowledge any personal responsibility or complexity in the situation, that's a red flag. When every conversation circles back to their victimhood, when they start using language like, they'll see, or they'll be sorry, or people are going to remember what they did to me, you're witnessing the construction of a justification narrative. They're building the mental framework that will eventually allow them to commit violence and feel righteous about it. Third, pay attention to any comments about doing something significant or memorable, even if they seem vague or hypothetical. Killers often give verbal warnings that get dismissed as dark humor or empty threats. They'll say things like, I'm going to do something big, or people won't forget me, or I'll make sure everyone knows my name. These aren't jokes. These are trial balloons. They're testing to see if anyone takes them seriously, and when nobody does, it reinforces their belief that they're invisible, that drastic action is the only way to be seen. William Spengler literally wrote in his suicide note that he was doing what he does best, killing people, but he'd made similar comments to acquaintances before. Nobody reported it. Nobody intervened. And fourth, watch for what psychologists call behavioral closure. This is when someone suddenly starts giving away possessions, closing bank accounts, saying goodbyes that feel strangely final, or tying up loose ends in their life as if they're preparing to disappear. This isn't always suicidal ideation in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's pre-homicidal preparation. They know they're not coming back from what they're about to do, so they're setting their affairs in order. It's methodical, it's intentional, and it's one of the clearest signs that someone has moved from fantasy to planning. But even when all these signs are present, even when the evidence is staring us in the face, we still struggle to connect the dots. And that brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. Why do we keep missing these warnings? And what can we actually do to prevent the next Christmas massacre before it happens? Why do we keep missing these warnings? And what can we actually do to prevent the next Christmas massacre before it happens? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary. We miss the signs because we don't want to believe people we know are capable of extreme violence. There's a psychological phenomenon called normalcy bias, where our brains automatically discount threats that seem too extreme or out of the ordinary. When your coworker mentions feeling invisible during the holidays, when your neighbor talks endlessly about his ex-wife ruining his life, when someone posts cryptic messages on social media about making people pay attention, we rationalize it away. We tell ourselves they're just venting, just having a bad day, just going through a rough patch. We convince ourselves that intervention would be awkward or overstepping boundaries. And that hesitation, that social politeness, that unwillingness to seem dramatic or paranoid, creates the exact opening that allows these situations to escalate into tragedy. But here's what you need to understand. The people who commit these Christmas massacres aren't keeping their intentions completely secret. They're communicating distress signals, sometimes quite loudly. The problem is that we've culturally agreed to ignore those signals until it's too late. Think about how many times you've heard someone say after a mass casualty event, "He always seemed quiet," or "We had no idea he was capable of this," or "There were no warning signs." That's almost never true. What they mean is, nobody wanted to acknowledge the warning signs. Nobody wanted to be the person who reported a concern and turned out to be wrong. Nobody wanted to damage a relationship or seem judgmental. So everyone stayed quiet, and the pattern continued unchecked. Let me be very clear about something. If you know someone who exhibits multiple red flags, especially during the holiday season, you have options. You can reach out directly and ask if they're okay, genuinely okay, not just social script okay. Sometimes, that simple act of acknowledgement of being seen and heard can interrupt a destructive thought pattern. You can alert family members or close friends who might have more influence. You can contact mental health crisis lines or community support services and describe the behaviors you're witnessing. In cases where there are explicit threats or clear danger signs, you can and should contact law enforcement. Yes, it feels invasive. Yes, it might damage the relationship. But which would you rather? Live with temporary awkwardness or permanent regret? The reality is that these killers want to be stopped almost as much as they want to act. That's why they leave clues. That's why they make statements. They're testing whether anyone cares enough to intervene, whether anyone values them enough to take their pain seriously. And when nobody does, when their signals are met with silence or dismissal, it confirms their distorted worldview that they're invisible, that violence is the only language anyone will understand. So intervention isn't just about preventing tragedy. It's about disrupting that confirmation cycle. It's about showing someone that they matter before they decide to matter through destruction. But there's an even deeper layer to this that we haven't addressed yet. We've talked about the individual psychology, the social isolation, the warning signs, but we haven't talked about why Christmas specifically serves as such a powerful symbolic target and what that tells us about the way these killers view the world itself, and what that tells us about the way these killers view the world itself. Christmas isn't just a date on the calendar. It's a cultural archetype. It represents safety, innocence, family bonds, childhood wonder, unconditional love. It's one of the few times each year when even the most cynical among us pretend to believe in something pure and good. We decorate our homes. We gather with people we care about. We exchange gifts as symbols of affection. We play music that explicitly celebrates peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Christmas is, in many ways, our collective agreement to pause the chaos of everyday life and pretend, even if just for a moment, that the world is kind and that we are loved. And that's precisely why it becomes a target. When a killer chooses to attack on Christmas, they're not just murdering individuals. They're desecrating a symbol that belongs to everyone. They're taking something that's supposed to represent the best of human connection and intentionally corrupting it, poisoning it, making it unsafe. And they know that this symbolic destruction will resonate far beyond the immediate victims. Every person who hears about a Christmas massacre feels it differently than they would a crime on any other day. The holiday itself becomes contaminated. Future Christmases carry the shadow of what happened. You can't fully separate the joy from the horror anymore. And for a narcissistic killer who feels invisible and powerless, that level of cultural impact is intoxicating. They've permanently altered how thousands or even millions of people experience one of the most sacred days of the year. But here's what's critical to understand. This kind of symbolic violence isn't inevitable. These crimes are preventable. The majority of these killers showed clear warning signs long before they acted. The problem wasn't that the signs didn't exist. The problem was that people saw them and chose to look away, chose to stay silent, chose not to intervene because it felt uncomfortable or intrusive. And that choice, that collective decision to prioritize social comfort over safety, is what allows these tragedies to happen. So what do we actually do with this knowledge? How do we translate understanding into action? First, if you know someone who's going through a devastating divorce, who's lost their job, who's isolated and withdrawn during the holidays, don't ignore them. Reach out, have an honest conversation. Ask them directly if they're okay, and don't accept surface-level answers. Sometimes the simple act of being acknowledged, of having someone care enough to check in, can interrupt a destructive spiral before it reaches the point of no return. One phone call, one text message, one genuine expression of concern, that's all it might take to prevent a tragedy. Second, share this knowledge. Talk about these patterns with your family, your friends, your community. Educating people about the warning signs of violence isn't morbid or paranoid. It's responsible. It's protective. The more people who understand how these situations develop, the more eyes we have watching for danger, the more opportunities we create for early intervention. Knowledge is a form of collective defense. Third, if you're the one struggling, if you're facing a lonely Christmas, if you're drowning in feelings of rejection or worthlessness, understand that reaching out for help isn't weakness, it's courage. There are crisis hotlines, there are therapists, there are online communities and support groups specifically designed for people going through exactly what you're experiencing. You don't have to face this alone, and you certainly don't have to let despair turn into something darker. And fourth, never dismiss someone who talks about revenge or violence, even if it sounds like a joke or hyperbole. These warnings matter. They're not random. They're signals that someone is constructing a narrative that could end in bloodshed. Taking those signals seriously, responding to them appropriately, could literally be the difference between life and death. But even with all of this understanding, even with all these preventive measures, there's still one final question we need to confront about what drives someone to choose Christmas as their stage for destruction. There's still one final question we need to confront about what drives someone to choose Christmas as their stage for destruction. It comes down to this. These killers understand, perhaps better than we'd like to admit, that attacking during Christmas guarantees they'll never be forgotten. They've studied the cultural landscape. They know that crimes committed on December 24th or 25th carry a weight that identical crimes on random Tuesdays never will. The juxtaposition of violence against the backdrop of peace and goodwill creates a cognitive dissonance so severe that it burns itself into collective memory. We remember the Covina Christmas massacre. We remember the Webster firefighter ambush. We remember these names and dates because they violated something we hold sacred. And that permanence, that guaranteed place in history, is exactly what a narcissistic killer craves. Bruce Pardo got what he wanted in the most twisted sense possible. His name became known. His story was covered by every major news outlet. People talked about him, analyzed him, tried to understand him. He forced the world to acknowledge his existence and his pain. But here's the cruel irony he didn't fully comprehend until it was too late. He's not remembered as a victim. He's not remembered as someone who was wronged and fought back. He's remembered as a monster, a coward, a man so pathetically unable to process rejection that he murdered 9 innocent people, including children, and set their bodies on fire. That's his legacy. Not sympathy, not understanding, just horror and disgust. And the family he destroyed? They'll never experience Christmas the same way again. The holiday is permanently stained with blood and trauma. The children who survived that night, the ones who watched their family members die, who smelled the smoke and heard the screams, will carry that with them forever. Every December, every time they see Christmas lights or hear carols, they'll be transported back to that moment of terror. Their sense of safety, of trust, of joy during what should be the happiest time of year was annihilated by one man's inability to cope with divorce. And for what? What did Bruce Pardo actually gain? A few hours of feeling powerful before he drove to his brother's house and put a bullet through his own head. He died alone in that car, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making, with nothing to show for his rage except a pile of bodies and a lifetime of trauma he inflicted on survivors. There was no glory, no vindication, no moment where he felt satisfied or justified, just emptiness, regret that came far too late, and the cold realization that he'd become exactly what he claimed to hate, someone who destroys families. This is the brutal truth about the homicidal mind that nobody wants to accept. There's no poetry in it, no redemption arc, no hidden complexity that makes it understandable or sympathetic. It's just waste. Human potential turned to ash because someone chose destruction over healing, violence over vulnerability, murder over reaching out for help. And the most frustrating part, it didn't have to happen. None of these Christmas massacres had to happen. Every single one of them was preventable if someone had paid attention, if someone had intervened, if the killer himself had made a different choice at any point along his descent into violence. So here we are years later, still talking about Bruce Pardo and Ronald Gene Simmons and William Spengler, still trying to understand what makes someone weaponize the holiday season, still searching for patterns and warning signs. And the answer, as uncomfortable as it is, remains the same. The night may be silent, but certain minds are never at peace. And until we learn to recognize that dangerous combination of narcissism, isolation, and rage before it metastates into violence, until we create a culture where reaching out for help is normalized and checking on struggling people is expected. These Christmas horrors will continue. The question isn't whether it will happen again. The question is whether we'll finally be paying attention when the next warning signs appear. The question is whether we'll finally be paying attention when the next warning signs appear. Look, if você chegou até aqui, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. You're not looking for sensationalism or cheap thrills. You want to actually understand how these minds work, how to recognize danger, how to protect yourself and the people around you. That's valuable. That matters. So if this kind of deep dive into criminal psychology is something you want more of, hit that subscribe button. We're building something different here, a community that takes this stuff seriously, that learns from it, that uses knowledge as defense. And if you made it all the way to the end, drop a comment and just say Silent Night. That's it. It helps me know you're really engaging with this content, and honestly, it's good to know I'm not just talking into the void. This stuff is heavy, it's dark, but it's real. And having people who get that, who understand why this matters, makes all the difference. Oh, and hit the like button if this video made you think differently about something, if it gave you a new perspective or taught you something you didn't know before. It's a small thing, but it tells me this approach is working, that digging into the psychology instead of just recounting crimes is what you're here for. Before you go, there's a video right here that goes even deeper into how narcissists justify violence to themselves, the internal logic they use to make murder feel righteous. It's the perfect companion to what we just covered. Click it and keep going with me. I'll see you there. M.